what's your secret? You got the kind of vibe that leaves men speechless. It could be model, multitasking genius. Yeah, you got it all.
Welcome back to Breakthrough Conversations with Rhoda and Company. So today's conversation is real, y'all. All of mine are, but this one is necessary. And it's one many women, especially Black women, know all too well. So I'm joined by my guest, Monique McKinney. Welcome, Monique.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Monique, she's using her voice to challenge this narrative that has existed in workplaces far too long. The labeling of Black women as loud or aggressive when they are simply being clear, confident, and direct. After a personal experience in her professional life, she leaned into this topic even deeper, exploring the patterns, the biases, and the impact it has on how women show up at work. So the journey led her to a book, I'm Not Yelling by Elizabeth Libya, which speaks directly to navigating these experiences while still owning your voice. So today, we're talking about what it means to speak up anyway, what it means to challenge the labels, what it means to not shrink, lead without shrinking. So Monique, I want to welcome you thank you for bringing forward and suggesting this very important and necessary topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I know we started talking about it a little bit. We could talk for hours on this subject, but I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for asking me to join
I
you.
am so excited. So Monique, you mentioned a personal experience that sparked this conversation. What happened?
Yeah, sure. So in 2024, I was working in a senior leadership role and in a hospital. And I was working with a new leader, and it was at the time of like a performance review. And so as I was getting prepared for the performance review, like I'm an HR professional, so I was supposed to be a SMED into understanding how to give effective performance reviews. And so I sat down with this leader, the president at the time, and I was going through the review, and then he at the time pulled out a separate sheet of paper and had all of these different incidents and sightings and information in it above and beyond what we'd ever talked about or anything that I had seen, nothing we had never talked about. So I was in shock.
Right.
But not only was I in shock, I was also becoming very frustrated and because I was thrown off guard. I didn't know why we were having this conversation about things that weren't true at the review time.
Yes.
Right. And so I was a little discombobulated. I pulled off of my 20 plus years of experience at the time, and I asked to end the meeting and so that I could digest the information that I was just presented with in that meeting, and to then give my rebuttal to that information after I was able to kind of process it and really absorb the information that I had just received for the first time. So that was my personal experience. And what I learned from that was with all of my 20 plus years in human resources, it should never be that time at the performance review that you learn of new things, right? My old boss used to call that, he would call that the 2x4 effect. Well, the non 2x4 effect, I should say that, because you usually see a 2x4 coming if it's swinging. But if it's not, which was this situation, it kind of makes you a little unsettled and throws you out. Yeah, it was breathtaking. And so that experience in of itself, I separated from the organization. I was in a contract, so it eventually ended. And I look back on that experience as a life lesson to then begin talking to students currently at WashU through the CAPS program about how nonprofits, but any business should create what is an effective performance review and what's an ineffective performance review, mostly centered around constructive and appreciative feedback, right? Which I think carries itself throughout the course of, a professional career, or, your job, right?
Yes.
You would think that you would just have these natural conversations
ongoing
with your employees. And so that was a pivotal moment that sparked. And then the words, there was something in the kind of that off to the side that talked about a conversation that said that I was yelling and that the behavior seemed aggressive. And so that was breathtaking. And so then, being the me, I like to research and really try to understand how Michelle would say how or Kamala said, how did we get here? Let's start, how did we get here? And so those words took me back, and I just started looking at things on LinkedIn, and I just typed in the title about Black women being called loud and aggressive, and this book showed up. And it was like, oh my God, like, why didn't I already have this prescription before I went into this meeting? But my experience in that meeting led me to understand how to deal in that moment and grab my power back to be able to say, I'm not just you're just not gonna give me any kind of information as no HR person. This is this season. So so that was a pivotal moment. That's what sparked it.
I'm sorry that happened, but that is very common. Two things, is probably multiple, but the two things I really keyed on when you were sharing your story is, one, the performance process and how broken it is. It really boils down. I tell people all the time, at the root of any issue in a corporation or organization is usually leadership. It's a problem in leadership. So that stood out to me, that leader held on to all of that and thought it was appropriate and okay to save it. Didn't fact find, didn't talk to you, didn't ask for your side of the story, nothing, and presented it in your performance review.
But and thinking about it, if I was, if I was a Caucasian woman, right, of one that, looking at the leadership team at that location, and wondered to myself often, even now, would I have also have received the same type of kind of side note, tallying of incidents, but then also the same type of adjectives being described in my behavior because of the tenor and tone of my voice. And so for me, it just brought back something that someone said to me in high school, in high school. And it was like, Monique, you have a really distinctive voice, and it's stayed the same my entire life. Like, and so when I talk and people hear me, I was in Schnucks one day and they were like, Monique
they
Wilson.
Knew who you were.
They knew exactly who I was. It's like, so, and I think back to where I wanted my career to start with. I wanted to be a news anchor. And so it was always this, I think, the tenor and in my tone of my voice came definitely from my parents. But definitely the confidence was instilled in me in the household. I wasn't raised in a household where I had parents or a dad that would shush me. And so we were always able to speak our minds in a respectable way, of course. And when I was growing up, and so that led me to not being able to have to shrink it in the workplace. And so that situation taught me that again, we don't have to shrink, right? And so to bring it full circle, it was one that was pivotal that led me to start talking about and teaching to students how to do it the right way. Right.
So Monique, I know you say you eventually left that organization, but how did that moment impact how you saw yourself at work? Because I know like you said, it knocked you off your feet, and sometimes these things scar us.
And it did. So it made me feel like at the time, like I was being an imposter, right? Like I was being separated and judged differently or measured differently than my peers. And having peers that some of them, sporadically, some of them that looked like me and talked like me as well. And so that kind of shocked me. And so I began to reflect, is this really the truth? Is this really how I am seen on the outside? Because I'm very conscientious about that. And I think that just comes with, it came with our line of work as being in HR, but then also working at very conservative organizations as well. So having to take headshots for jobs, things of that nature. So always very conscientious about how I showed up, how I presented. So I just didn't, I was like, I'm just not going to take that. Like, this is one very heavily weighted criticism that from one person. This wasn't a 360. It wasn't something that was adopted and used from top to bottom in the organization about how we deliver feedback or how we measure performance. And so it not even something that I trained about at that organization. So I was really, really shocked that this was the way that I was being chosen to be rated against everyone else.
Right. Something you said about, is this the truth? I love that you asked yourself that question because, and the other point you made, it was one person's synopsis based upon whatever feedback that person had gotten, which is not necessarily fact.
Sure. Yeah. And so doing a more deep dive into that, right? I learned, especially being called loud and then it coming off, as we just talked about, as aggressive, was because of it's just different.
Right.
And I had to think, I was like, that's not how I show up. I've been, in HR and professional, I've never received feedback like this ever. I've part of multiple organizations and I can talk, top to bottom to people from presidents down to, line staff. And I've always gotten good reviews and been in the top. So I really started to try to not self-doubt myself, my work. Just based off of one opinion. And we often, I think as Black women, we do that. We'll like, as you just said, you said one person. And I love numbers because I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I was like, that's not how you do a performance review. And why am I thinking that this is really how I'm showing up? And then being labeled that way. So I also wanted to make sure that I was careful around, as I had an old boss around, he would say, be careful around the adjectives in which you are described as a woman. But for me, it's also as a Black woman. And so I have began to verbally say, we're going to change that adjective and we're going to describe it as this. And I learned that through going through a lot of personality assessments, being assessed myself through predictive index or through this. So really understanding things that may be triggering words for me that may, get a certain reaction, but also really being self-conscientious and understanding how I show up in the workplace.
Right. That's powerful too. I love that you use that technique to call it out, and let's change it, because that's gonna
change it.
And when people hear that, hopefully it raises awareness.
It always, they stop, they'll pause, and then I'll give them another word. So one of the words that came up in my DISC assessment in my S was rigid, because I was it rated a little lower than my D. I'm a true DISC, right? And so I was like, oh, I don't like that word. It's just something about that word that did not rest well with me, but I understand it. I understand the definition of it. And so I just began to change it over the years to just something to describe it just very differently and as it show up. As it's shown up, kind of more my dominance element in my personality, to just someone that is very confident, very assertive. And I think as a Black woman, there is absolutely nothing wrong with me being able to say that, right? Absolutely. And so,
or being that.
Yeah. And so I love the fact that after that, landing, working where I am now, having a culture that loves and embraces that. And so it feels different now. Yeah.
I love that you're in that environment. Yes. First of all, I'm like, does it exist?
Yes, it does.
That's amazing. Yes, I love this. So what do you think people misunderstand most in those type of situations, like the one you were in?
Well, I think it is definitely how society tries to describe women, especially Black women.
Yes.
And so in this book, Elizabeth talks about the imposter syndrome, but she also goes into a deep dive about how we just from, psychological studies that are done and just independent studies that are done on Black women, how we, even before we enter the room, we're already rated with biases. And you and I are sitting here having a conversation, and it could be, they could be this different color, and we're still called loud and aggressive. But it is how society has deemed and treated, and how we've allowed things to show up to narrate how we look as Black women, and not to accept that, to just be quite frank about it, and just not to accept those words in the description of as being described as a woman.
That
and I
so
think pushing individuals, especially men, or anyone, to use better words when trying to describe behavior. And so for me, I take these words as criticism, not constructive.
Right.
Because what it did to me was it was very, I felt demeaned, and I felt all of this work that I had put in was just, superficial, and it wasn't valued. So it was very, being called that in real time was very different. I would say it's the modern day N-word for Black men, right? And I didn't like it. And so I said, my grandmother was like, well, if you things you don't like, you change them.
Right. Did you get a sense if that leader that did that got any awareness, receive any of this as education or learning moment?
Yeah, I think that I would say no. Because one thing about it, I mean, St. Louis is so small, right? And I've been doing recruitment and HR for so long again. So my roots run deep in St. Louis. And so what I did know to be true was what good leadership looked like, and also what poor leadership looked like. And after that, I think definitely the organization internally began to kind of look at things, but I don't know how deep of a dive they look in just the leadership component, because we say the fish rot from the head down, and so that really was some hard things that they would have to look at, that organization starting from the top down. And this was just only a subsidiary of a much larger organization. So that takes some internal movement, some pushing, and I don't know that they're ready for that,
because at the end of the day, effective work in diversity, equity, and inclusion space it's an inside out job.
Yeah, right.
And what I mean by that is individual. This is an individual journey. So those individuals have to choose to want to look inwardly.
Right.
And then challenge those thoughts and biases and seek out the education and increase the awareness to make different choices.
Especially when it comes to words, right? Because I think, a very educated person, knowing that, very working with, multiple cultures and multiple industries, these would not be the chosen words to describe any woman or anyone for that fact. When you're really in this moment, just really trying to give feedback or really try to give some type of measurement to performance, which made it not really effective because it wasn't things that we knew about. It was just the first time I was hearing about it.
New information.
Yes.
New news. So why do you think Black women are often labeled as loud or aggressive in these professional spaces?
Yeah. I think a lot of times it's from what we things what we read, how we see women depicted on television, how we also allow again individuals to describe us in spaces, and not changing the narrative. For me it is using my voice as power to speak in micro or large spaces around things that are uncommon or uncomfortable. And so for me, this really brought home a lot of relevant things to make sure that if I sat down and I wanted to talk about this book, that I was able to have some relatability, to someone that may have experienced something like this, and be able to be authentic, right? To be able to talk about it. And, again, just help change the narrative.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Not Yelling.
I'm
For
Not
those that
Yelling.
are listening, this is the book we're speaking on by Elizabeth Liba. I'm going to have to check this out.
Yes.
And these words, loud, aggressive, hostile, I've experienced a lot of this myself, being an African-American woman in the workplace and working in HR. And I had a vice president of HR. I was giving feedback about one of her leaders who had acted unseemly in a meeting. And I was given, and that leader happened to be African American, but the leader I was giving the feedback to was a Caucasian lady. And I was telling her about this person, and she stopped me and said, "Is that a Black girl thing?" And I say, "Is what a Black girl thing?" The head rolling and the hostility and the aggression. I'm sorry, did I offend you? I say, it is absolutely not a Black girl thing. It's a human thing.
Yes. Right.
So yes, you have to be able to call it out in the
right
moment.
there in the moment. And I did. And so in that moment, knowing that I could also take the time to end that conversation with that leader, again, taking my power back in this situation to change the narrative, to change his, his criticism into something that didn't have any relevance or any factual basis at all. And so for me, it was taking my power back, but it also brought up this the author Zora Neale Hurston. One of the quotes that she's often quoted in saying, "If you are silent about your pains, they'll kill you and say that you've enjoyed it."
Yes.
And so in that moment, I wanted to make sure that I taking my power back, but then also offering giving that rebuttal to saying, I'm not going to be silent about this, and I'm going to speak up, and you're not going to ever call anyone loud and aggressive in these meetings again.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to say that I enjoy the killing.
Exactly.
I want you to read that quote again.
Yeah. So if you are silent about your pains, they'll kill you. Say it, they'll kill you, and say you enjoyed it.
That is so powerful.
So I'll say that again. If you're silent about your pains, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it.
Wow.
So to me, I don't want them to think that I've enjoyed any pain.
No.
I don't think that I wanted to be enjoy calling being loud and aggressive because my voice is different, or I look different, or I show up different, or I'm just different.
And that's what it is. We're all just different.
Right.
That's so true. That's important to note that, number one, that should inspire us the more to speak up and call it out in the moment. No, because it costs us too much.
It does.
There's a whole debate going on right now on social media from the Kevin Hart roast.
Yes.
And all the jokes that were affiliated with that. So I was kind of like on the fence a little, but then I was like, nope, it wasn't right. And I'll tell you why. Because what we allow becomes the culture. And when we allow things like that, disrespecting, using our trauma against us, and disguising it as jokes, then when those things happen again, because another George Floyd or similar is going to happen again, then we don't really have a leg to stand on to call anybody out. It wasn't funny when they talked about Rodney King.
To me, I don't take pleasure in and think anything is ever funny about someone being deaf. Or being abused.
Yes.
And so I personally did not like it. And so this book sparked Elizabeth inner thought, and it was around George Floyd killing. And she wanted to really understand why she had these experiences in college that led her, that had so much fury around, you know, really needing to get her voice out. But then when it did come out, she got called loud and aggressive and saying, oh, you don't have to yell when we're just simply here. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. So for me, I don't take that lightly. And I would agree with you, Rhoda. I saw the roasting and I did not take light of the fact that, you know, the reference around George Floyd. I'm also raising, I have a young a son that is 21. He's still my baby, but he a young man. And at the time, he was still in high school. And so I don't think that that's funny at all. And so I also don't allow that energy to consume me because you have a comedian that uses this platform. This is his performance and how he gets paid and how others get paid. And so for me, I just show up and I'll just be in different spaces speaking about it. Because that's not something that,
that I
don't
can
think
get behind.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. But for those that are listening, the reason why this came up and the reason why we're talking about it is because we need to use our voice to advocate for ourselves, to educate others in the moment so that we can increase their awareness and they will pause at minimum, before and think about the words they're going to use and the things they're going to say.
Absolutely.
And also, it's also important because these labels have an impact on confidence, career growth, opportunities, mental well-being.
Yes, it does.
To the quote you just read, the killing part is the breaking of the spirit.
Yeah.
It breaks you down and it can impact you the rest of your days. And so what do you believe the impact of those labels have on confidence, career growth, or mental well-being?
Well, we see it every day in the workplace. We know, and Elizabeth talks about in the book, how we as Black women carry this country on our backs. And so we are worked the hardest. We are paid the lowest. We are, raising kids in single family households and with a village and most of the time minus dad. And so let's go even back further than that, from the point when we had chattel slavery and we were having to produce things for the family and having to work the long hours and 8-9 months picking cotton. And so they thought that, and they still think that Black women can endure more pain than anyone. And there was a study, she talks about the study that was done on Black women that tried to replicate that we can withstand more pain and agony. And I cringe when I think about what was happening in the early 1900s when gynecology was being established and we were being used as test rabbits mostly. What comes to mind is the
Behind
book,
the Sheets.
Henrietta Lacks book, where they took her cells, but she was being treated at Johns Hopkins in the basement, getting radiation treatment. But then how her cells have helped cure so many things, and it's still they're still doing the work. So when you ask that question, I was like, man, like what kind of I just gave you 3 or 4 examples of why we may, as Black women, show up stressed and overworked, and then our behavior sometimes may come out as aggressive or edgy, or I had even heard the word at one time, huffy, which that was a new one for me, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a new one for me, huffy. And so again, for me, it is changing, showing up and changing the narrative on how I'm being described in that behavior, and then making sure that it is factual, right? But then also making sure, like you said, calling it out in the moment, right?
Yes. Because one of the questions I was going to ask you is, when we say use your voice, how does that look in practice? One way is calling it out in the moment.
Absolutely.
You're your own biggest advocate.
You are. The other way is, for me, has been to be expressive as I can and what is most comfortable for me. So as I did, I took it as a teaching moment. I sit on a board, and it just off of just networking and having the background to be able to speak power into effective performance reviews. I was tapped on the shoulder by a professor at WashU to say, hey, we want to pull you over here to speak on this topic, also based off of your personal experience. And so I turned it into a passion project to make sure that young leaders and future leaders, but even also professionals, are in organizations delivering effective performance reviews, and that they're describing behaviors not to be criticism, but using constructive and appreciative feedback to describe those behaviors, but then also making sure that those performance reviews are based on facts and not fiction. Things you've had conversations with employees multiple times about things. It wasn't the 2x4 effect. You didn't catch them off guard. You didn't slide out a piece of paper from the side, above and beyond the standard performance review, which would be relative to a note to file, which is something that could be used in court.
It's
but
discoverable,
it is discoverable. And so it's also something that you have to speak to be fact or fiction. And so for me, I am very comfortable and confident being able to speak about this, because it was something that has helped shape me personally. And I will continue to, to help shape others about this topic as well, so that we don't use it wrong.
No, you use that experience, which I love, and turned it into something positive. And I love that you're going back to the younger, emerging leaders of the future in the at the college level, and articulating this and giving them that insight. because that's not standard curriculum.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
It needs to be.
It should.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
they're getting it right. So they're getting it right through this program. And what I love is that they're so engaged and have practical questions about real reviews that they've actually had to either have even been given or that they've had to deliver as a leader, young or old, right? And so it's so powerful hearing the stories and now hearing along this journey that, you know what, Monique, you're not the only one that were called or were treated with biases in this way. And so when we talked earlier about you know, this one person, it made it full circle for me to say, you know what, you've been doing this right all along. Yes,
and you took your power back,
and I took my power back.
Yes. So when leaders hear this feedback, and we're sharing with them these new words or different ways of giving feedback or describing behavior, how should leaders respond when they hear the feedback from their employees?
Yeah. So it should be, as a practitioner, right? And also as a leader, I would use that time to listen. Because it takes vulnerability for employees to really express themselves in a very vulnerable time, in a very vulnerable situation. So for me as a leader, it would take me to give me some pause, to listen, to sit back, to be reflective of what the employee is actually giving me, to understand, to digest it. And to not provide any excuses in that moment, to just listen and absorb the information that the employee is giving to you, to try to understand it and really acknowledge the vulnerability that the employee is given in that moment. They're taking their power back, right? And so I think that is also very encouraging for a leader in that moment, to be able to speak power to an employee where you are delivering some uncomfortable feedback, or it's, you know, on either side, on either side.
I love that. I also would love to see leaders become curious.
Sure.
Yeah, ask when I did or said, etc., and understand where they're coming from. Yeah. Why did that trigger you?
Yeah.
How could I have said it differently?
Sure.
Etc.
Yeah.
So we see these patterns in the workplace. What do you think needs to stop in the cultures in these workplaces to break this pattern?
Sure. Well, for sure, we again need to understand biases. We need to understand stereotyping. We need to understand how that affects people. We're all human. And we want to really make sure that we're sensitive to the fact that words can hurt. Sometimes words can be more powerful than actions to me personally. And so I think that for sure, for me, it is again rolling it back to changing the narrative. And I'm going to stay there because I want, you know, especially for Black women to use this book and use this guide to navigate in spaces that may have left them uncomfortable. That gives them some type of guidance in a workplace, words of affirmations, you taking your power back, you are more than what you see, things of that nature to really help the workforce begin, and the media and radio, to really start to getting to see Black women described differently. And then us in these intimate conversations being able to talk about this subject as well. Whether it's in small spaces or in large spaces. I think that it's all very relevant and all very, very important.
Yes, it really is. Again, for those listening or just tuning in, I'm Not Yelling is the book.
Yep.
And I think that we should start a book club or something around this and maybe build a workshop because it's that important.
That idea.
It's that important.
That. Yes,
yeah.
It is. Yes,
so
it is.
I'm going to move to the rapid fire round,
Okay.
Monique, and I just have 3 questions, and whatever comes to mind, I want you to answer.
Okay.
So the first one is one word that describes your voice today.
Relevant.
Relevant. Yes, it is. A phrase women should stop saying at work.
Oh, and I had to get this one some thought. A phrase women should stop saying at work. I'm sorry.
Yes. Apologizing for things we don't even own.
Over-apologizing.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Because we apologize, but we're not sorry.
No.
So
that
we
is
should
so
stop
true.
saying that.
So one thing you want every woman to remember before speaking up.
Yeah. I want women to remember before speaking up that they always have a village to support them and whatever they want to do.
Yes.
From top to bottom, you have a village somewhere.
Right.
And so for me, this was my village. This is what spoke to me at the moment, working through that situation, being labeled this, unfavorable term as a Black woman. And so that's what I would that's what I would give.
Yes. Monique, this passion you have around this and the work you're doing, going to the University of WashU and talking to the students and part of the CAPS program and all the consulting work that you do around St. Louis. I've talked to a lot of women on this podcast and otherwise, and a lot of women groups in St. Louis. I've not heard anybody talk about this. And this is something that resonates and is applicable across the board.
Yes,
you cannot live in brown skin in this world and not have experienced this.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And so what that also speaks to me and says that it is an uncomfortable topic to talk about, though. And I get it.
Right.
Because it was uncomfortable for me to be called that.
Right.
And so I just have learned that, like my girlfriend would say, at this big age, that bringing power to my voice is very important to me now in this new season, becoming of a certain age, right? I'm saying I'm going to call it my Jubilee year. And my grandmother would always say, because she was an entrepreneur and I looked up to her. She was a hairdresser and I loved her dearly. So my passion comes from her.
Yes.
Being that, she went to school and had to leave school in 6th grade, but built a business, a salon business, raised an amazing family. My mother is amazing, powerful women that, I'm definitely standing on shoulders of women that feel like they may not have their power and their voice as of yet. And so I want to be able to continue to do that.
Yes, and you are. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Because this is mission work. And we need this, and especially our younger Black girls that have come up in the climate that they're coming up in. We didn't have social media to contend with. They had all of that stuff that's coming with social media. They have the current political climate, all the division and all of that. This could become something really big.
Yeah,
so I want to just thank you.
About this.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
This conversation matters, and because too many women have been conditioned to shrink, to soften, or silence themselves just to be accepted. We are not yelling. We are passionate. We are not hostile. We are confident. And the truth is, your voice isn't the problem. It's not your voice. The environment that mislabels it may be the problem. So thank you, Monique, for bringing honesty, courage, and perspective to this conversation. And to those that are listening, if this episode resonated with you, share it with another woman who needs the reminder to speak up and take up space. And remember this, you don't need to change your voice to be heard. You need to use it I'll see you next time on Breakthrough Conversations with Rhoda and Company.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Rhoda.
you.
Hey, what's your secret? You got the kind of vibe that leaves you speechless. It could be model, multitasking genius. Yeah, you got it all. Hey, what's your story? A kick-ass mom and 40 under 40. It's soccer practice in your high heel glory. Yeah, you do it all.